The government has partially fought off a series of objections to HS2 2 in the courts. But in a victory to residents affected by the rail project, the compensation scheme has been deemed unlawful. The first phase of HS2 would run from London to Birmingham, and a second phase extends the line to Leeds and Manchester. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
High speed and highly controversial. The plan to build a super-fast railway through the middle of England is still on track after the government wins the latest court battle.
It is a convincing decision by the judge justifying the government's policy on high-speed rail. It means that we now have from the judge a green light to move forward with the project, subject to the parliamentary approvals.
It is a significant victory for the government. This court case really had the potential to cause them problems. It could have cost them more money. It could even have delayed the whole project for a couple of years. Well, that is not now going to happen. But their opponents haven't given up yet.
We're almost certainly going to appeal, particularly the issue that the government hasn't made a decision, which I think everybody recognises they clearly have. That's a totally bizarre judgment in our view, and clearly needs to be appealed. And I think we'll look very closely at whether we should be appealing the issue of the timing of the challenge.
The judge did find fault with one important part of the government's scheme, saying a consultation on compensation wasn't fair to those whose houses will be blighted by the line. Ministers say they'll put that right. So for now, high-speed rail still has a green light. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Well, let's go to the High Court now and speak to our correspondent Mike Sargent. And Mike, at least one minister saying this is a major victory for the coalition.
Yes, that's right. The government's calling it a landmark decision at the High Court today. Ministers said the legal arguments came under 10 broad headings and they lost on only one of those. Now, all sorts of other things were considered as part of this series of judicial reviews. There were 5 cases in total looking at environmental assessments, habitat assessments of the new line, whether decisions were rational about the routing of the line, whether alternatives were considered, and of course the consultation on compensation for those living near the route. And that last one is the only one on which the government lost and the opponents of high-speed rail won. So the government says it is going to rerun that consultation. It's going to ask people for their opinions once more. But the message from ministers is that all of this means that high-speed rail is going ahead according to the existing timetable.
But won't all of these same hoops potentially have to be jumped through when it comes to the part of the scheme north of Birmingham?
Yes, indeed, and it's not over yet, even for the stretch of the line running up to Birmingham. Of course, the government will have to prepare a parliamentary bill, which it hopes to do this side of the election. And then all sorts of assessments will still have to take place, including environmental impacts and some of the things that campaigners have been talking about. That whole process will then have to be gone through for the Y shape at the top of England, the bit of the line that runs up to north from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds. So campaigners, whilst they will be appealing the decision here today, say that there will be many, many more days in court ahead, and they're certainly not giving up yet.
Mike, thank you.
Well, Joe Rukin is the campaign coordinator at Stop HS2 and joins us now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Simon Burns, the minister who's spoken on this today, described it as a major landmark victory for the project. What do you say?
Well, I'm very surprised that the government has said that basically part of their plan has been deemed to be unlawful, and they claim that as a landmark victory.
Well, they won 9 out of 10 points here, didn't they?
Well, what the judge basically said is that, you know, people might think that what the government is doing is foolish, but that's for Parliament to decide. It's not necessarily unlawful to waste taxpayers' money on a project that isn't necessary. You know, there's less expensive benefits. Less expensive alternative projects that can deliver more benefits to more people more quickly, and the government have ignored those. And the judge said that, you know, campaigners might be right in that dumping an extra 100,000 people into Euston without any plan whatsoever how to disperse them might be wrong, and disrupting the North London line, which hundreds of thousands of commuters rely on, might be wrong. But you know, it's not unlawful.
But that's not what today was about, though, was it? You had 10 specific points that were being looked at, and in 9 out of those 10 points, that the finding came down on the government's side?
Well, because the judge said, agreed with the ridiculous defence, to be perfectly honest, of the Department for Transport, was that no decision had yet been made, that HS2 as of yet was only a plan, and therefore the cases that were brought, you know, saying that HS2 had breached the environmental assessment regulations and the Habitats Directive, etc., weren't relevant because HS2 has not actually been decided on yet. It's only a plan, despite the fact that you've got over £250 million being spent on the project. The judge backed up the government's opinion that no decision has been made, which we find, you know, disappointing, and obviously there will be appeals.
A word on the consultation element into compensation for those affected, which did come down in your favour. As you'll have heard, our correspondent a moment ago saying that the government is now talking about rerunning that consultation. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we hope the government actually rerun the consultation fairly, but, you know, unfortunately we have little faith in them. What the government did in the original consultation is they consulted and then made a decision not based on the consultation at all, but based on the amount that compensation would cost. And that's what the problem here is, that there are thousands of people who are losing their life savings as a result of the property blight they are experiencing, and the government have decided to compensate not on loss but on how much that compensation will cost. And if they compensate on actual loss, the project will become even more unaffordable than it already is.
OK, thank you very much for your time. Joe Rukin there of Stop HS2.